there, welcome to Inkquiring Minds. My name is Doug and I'm back with another Pen Resurrection Sunday video. Happy New Year to all of you out there in Inkquiring Minds land. Before we were interrupted by the holiday season, I'd done a series of resurrections on Parker Vacumatics. There were 3 beautiful stacked celluloid fountain pens, one in gold, one in azure blue, and one in burgundy. I've got several Parker Vacumatics from which to choose to restore. You see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them here. I'm not going to restore all 5. Some of them have issues that are beyond my control, but let's start here with this one. And this is what we're going to restore today. This is 1944 Parker Vacumatic. It has a really nice transparent barrel. Beautiful. But let's continue and triage this 1944 Parker Vacumatic. It has the classic blue diamond split arrow Art Deco style clip, and there's the imprint with the .4 next to the imprint, which says it's 1944 third quarter. I'll show you the unboxing of this pen in a moment, because I purchased this pen back in July and now it's January. And the feed there has a T on it. That's interesting. I've done some research on that T, and the closest I can tell is that there were 3 letters stamped into the ebonite feeds of the Parker Vacumatics. One was an A for accountant, for the very fine, stiff accountant nibs. One was a W for wide, which means the channel needed to be wider. I'm assuming that T means thin. This is a very fine nib, so maybe the feed channel on this is thinner to accommodate the extra fine nib. Remove the hardware, polish it up, and get this pen back in writing condition again, I hope. It's a box of paper. There's got to be a pen in here somewhere. There it is. And it probably has ink in it. Guys, when you're shipping pens, try to run them under a little bit of water first, just to get the ink out. I think I'm going to just rinse this a little bit and then come back. Otherwise, I'll just be covered. There, so I rinsed it off a little bit. Let's take a look at the pen. It's a blue diamond split arrow. It looks like the barrel's transparent. That gold clip is going to come up nicely. Same thing with the finial and the cap band. Let's open it up and see. We have what looks like a fairly intact nib. Looks like a fine, and the tines need some adjusting. It's slightly out of whack. We should have a date right there. .4. That's the third quarter of 1944. Let's see if there's anything there. Well, it looks like it's got remnants of a sack to the bin of dead pens that need to be resurrected. Something to look forward to. So first up, I'm going to measure this Parker Vacumatic to confirm it is a standard size. So 128 millimeters, which is just about 5 inches, which confirms this is a standard Vacumatic. We'll get to the cap later. I'll take this section off and put that barrel aside. That diaphragm and pump seem to be working very nicely. We'll remove the breather tube. And the first thing we do when we get small parts, gotta remember this, Doug. I do this to remind myself. Put them in little containers so you don't lose them, Doug. Let me get out Bill's block. Thank you, Bill. And this is the right size tool to put this into one of the holes that fits. This one. We're going to knock that feed out of there and take a look at the nib. So we need some height first, so I don't knock my camera. And it tapped out very nicely. And there's our feed. And as to thin channel or not, I have no idea. That looks just pretty standard to me. It might have to do with the shape of the tip there, the channel and the tip. I don't know what the T stands for. The section's in good shape. Clean out some extraneous ink from there, and let's look at the nib. And all I see on the base of the nib is a 3, no dots. So that would be the fourth quarter of 1943. And the barrel is the third quarter of 1944. So that's not unusual. and that's an original nib. And I think I'm going to try to realign this because the nib is slightly misaligned. So I'm going to adjust it a little bit and see if I can get them to align properly with the nib out of the feed, and then I'll put it back on top of the feed and make sure that it's aligned. And I think I'll buff that gold up with my polishing cloth and maybe even my Dremel tool to get out those micro scratches. And there we go. After just a couple of seconds on the buffer, it's shining up like it's brand new. Beautiful. Of course, I'll polish it some more on my polishing cloth just to get some of those buffer swirls out of it. And now it's nicely aligned. We'll put it back with the feed in the section, and we'll do a dip test to make sure that nib is writing correctly. So before I put the nib, feed, and section together, I polished up that section with some Meguiar's number 9 mirror glaze swirl remover, and I polished the bottom part, visible part of the feed up with that same polish. And now we can put the feed, nib, and section back together again. Get some gripper material, align that feed up, square the shoulders there with the swoop of the edge of the nib, grip it tightly, and then try to find where it has been. It tends to fall into place when you turn this around because that nib and feed have been in that section for 70 some odd years, and it should go in fairly easily. There we go, and it goes right just slightly proud. We put our breather tube back in. That breather tube was really clean. I just rinsed it out and it's fine. Then we can put the whole kit and caboodle back together again into the section. Not going to worry about putting anything on those threads yet because we're just going to dip test this nib. Get out some Waterman's and some paper, which is Waterman's Serenity, and we'll dip this and see what the lay of the land is here. 1944 Parker Vacumatic, and this, I'm thinking, is a fine or an extra fine nib. It's very wet, so I'm not worried about that. So the spacing and the tines is good. But we have got feedback here and a little bit there. Yep, in all directions we have a lot of feedback. It's almost scratchy. But when I check, the tines are nicely aligned. So I'm going to use some Micromesh on this nib and get it to write smoother. So I got some Micromeshes here. There's 12,000, very fine, 8,000, 6,000. I don't need to go any further than that. Actually, I think I'll just try to start with the 8,000 and then go to 12,000. And because I've only dipped this nib, I'm going to need a little bit more lubricant, so I filled up my spring syringe with some water, squirt a little bit there, and we're going to do some up and down strokes 8 times, side to side, northeast to southwest, northwest to southeast, counterclockwise, clockwise, figure eights and figure eights in 2 different directions, about 8 strokes each. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. Left, right, figure eights, and figure eights. And then we'll check. Still a bit of feedback. Let's go to 12,000, a little bit of water, and do the same thing. I'm just turning over the nib just to round off the edges on the top. That's very nice for an extra fine nib, as you're going to expect some feedback with an extra fine nib. Let's see what we've got here. Some good amount of flex to this nib as well. Nice amount of bounce. I'm rather happy with that. I think I'm going to leave it at that and fill the pen with some ink and see how well it writes when it's running ink through that feed. Dip into the bottle and then pump until I hear no more bubbles. Yeah, no more bubbles. Well, that's writing very, very nicely now. Good amount of feedback, but if I want it to be smoother, I can polish a little bit more of that feedback out. And it's taking a lot of ink as well. Very nice. Now I think I'll take the ink out of it and we'll go after this barrel and this cap. Take that clip off and see whether we can polish it up as well. I see I'm getting some ink on my finger here. That's because I didn't seal this section with silicone grease. But I will do that when I'm finished polishing it. So I've decided, at the risk of destroying the diaphragm that's obviously working well in there, I'm going to take this pump out of here. So we'll get out my Vacumatic tool from the inky nib. Thank you, Scott. And we get the collet out, and that slips over those threads. And then we screw that collet down, and we get some gripper material, and we see whether we can release this pump. Yep, it's coming out nicely. The key is going to be not to tear or destroy that existing diaphragm. So it's going to come out to here, and then it's going to get stuck. So I'm going to put it back on a couple of threads just to hold it. We'll take our collet off. I'll hold on to this end of it while I hammer this, otherwise the pen will go shooting across the room. So now we have to push it down from the top, and I use the aluminum rod from my block, and I'm going to push down on that. I'm pushing down on the center dot of the diaphragm to see whether I can dislodge it. There we go, very gently. And will it come out? Yes, it will come out. It looks in good shape, but I've got a feeling that it wasn't sitting in there properly. This does not get glued. This just presses on the inside of the barrel. But while I've got it apart, I'm going to rinse all these parts out and clean them up, and then we'll apply some silicone grease and put this pump mechanism back in again. Okay, so I've cleaned the barrel out inside with a test tube brush, and so it's clean as a whistle right now. And I put this in the ultrasonic bath, and we make sure that diaphragm is all the way back to that shoulder, and we're going to put some silicone oil on the leading edge there and fit it into the barrel. So just a dab on that leading edge so it'll slide nicely and won't kink. So I'm just going to twist a little bit to get it in. That's what she said.
That's what she said.
And then engage a couple of threads here and add a drop of oil right there on those threads to make the moves nicely. And then we're going to put our collet on here, screw it down, and then I sort of twist it back and forth to make sure that it's not kinking inside. What's great about having that transparent barrel is you can see whether it's kinked inside there or not. It seems to be sliding around very nicely. And we just go hand tight and release the collet. And that should be functioning properly. And it is. But it puts my mind at ease that that is functioning properly. So now I'm going to leave the blind cap on here, and I'm going to go at this with some 400 grit sandpaper to even that surface out and take out many of those micro abrasions and gouges as I can. And then we'll follow up through the micro meshes from 1500 grit right through to 12,000 grit. And then we'll show this barrel all nice and brand new. So I sand evenly all around except for where that imprint is, and by getting this into a matte kind of a finish, it actually highlights where any deeper gouges might be, like some of these cap marks that you get around here, and any teeth marks that you might find on the blind cap or on the end. Now I just examine it for gouges. There's a little bit of a mark right there. And the sandpaper acts as an eraser, and it's gone. And you get that lovely smell of camphor as you're sanding. Now I keep my micro meshes in order from the coarsest to the finest, and then you don't get mixed up. And each successive finer grit of micro mesh erases the marks from the ones previous. So this is 1500 grit, and it should erase all of the marks I've got in here from the 400 grit. And if I see some marks left right there, like that, I can go back at those with the 400 grit to erase those, and then go at it with the 1500, and they're gone. At this point, I don't see any more gouges or scratches that need 400 grit. So I'm just going to go at it the whole thing evenly, with the exception of the imprint. Once we get to finer grits, I'll start going over that imprint to get the surrounding marks out. 1500 grit isn't coarse enough to actually erase that imprint, but it will file it down a little bit, so I'm going to try to avoid that. I want to keep that 0.4. And there we go. That is after 400 grit, all the micro meshes from 1500 through 12,000, then some Meguiar's Mirror Glaze, and finally with some Anderson Pens Micro Gloss number 1. And it's just glistening, gleaming, bright, beautiful, brand new, and we still have the imprint right there. Perfect. Now let's take the cap apart. I'm using some matting material and a pencil with an eraser on the end, and just turning the clip around to unscrew it. And it's going around, but the jewel is not coming out. So in that case, I use a little bit of low-tack painter's tape and try to get it to budge that way. So the jewel is still spinning with the cap, and the clip is moving independently. So that's stuck down inside there. So I'm going to use a little bit of my Pensbury Manor Penetrate Pen Potion number 7, or PMPPP number 7, just a drop to try to penetrate inside there. We're going to drop another one right inside the cap. I don't know whether it'll do anything or not, but we'll let that sit for a few hours and we'll see if we can budge it. And I wasn't able to get that jewel finial out of there. I soaked it in that PPP solution and it still wouldn't budge. I'm going to try to polish this cap and get those abrasions and scratches and gouges out around the clip. So I'm going to mask off the clip and the cap band and go at it, and we'll see how it comes up. And there we are, all polished up. I discovered why that top finial wouldn't come off, because there were some telltale marks of crazy glue around that edge. I polished them out, but someone glued that top jewel down, and it glued the plastic into the brass nut that's underneath here, but it allowed the clip to spin around. Now I've stabilized that clip as best I can with a little bit of CA glue underneath that clip right there. So you can barely see it, but it's stabilized now. And I was able to mask it all off and polish the cap up and polish the gold up with much difficulty. It's a lot easier when you get that clip off. But now the whole pen is pristine. The nib is in excellent condition, and I'm ready to fill this pen and give it a final writing test. So we'll weigh the pen first with the blind cap, 10.13, press tear, and we'll pump in some Waterman's Serenity Blue until I hear no more bubbles. And we have 1.32 milliliters of ink. Not too bad. And a nice transparent barrel through which you can see your ink levels. And we'll give this a try again. 1944. Parker Vacumatic, extra fine to fine, 14 karat nib. Still has feedback, but it is a lot smoother with a little bit of bounce and a lot of wetness. So I'm very pleased with how this came out. And now I'll give you my thoughts on this restoration. So what are my thoughts on this resurrection? Well, this was fairly straightforward, this one. I thought that it might be fairly straightforward because the diaphragm inside this pen was in good shape. There were no major nicks and scratches, and that nib only needed some minor tweaking in terms of its alignment and some smoothing to make it write beautifully. But like all resurrections that look like they're going to be fairly easy to start with, these pens always throw me a curve. This is only one of a couple, I think, that I've not been able to get that top jewel out of that cap to be able to take the cap off. So it made polishing up that cap a lot more difficult, but not impossible. The good thing was that the clip actually spun around a little bit, so I was able to spin it, polish, spin it, and polish, and spin it, and polish. So it was never really in the way. But along the way, I discovered that someone had crazy glued that top jewel in, and that's why I could never get it out. Well, I've stabilized that clip now, and it's not going to move. And this pen is in excellent shape, and I've decided to give it up for sale, and I'm going to ask the outrageous price of $150 US for it. Of course, you'll pay your own shipping, but the good news is Canada Post is back in business again, but I'm not going to use them anyway, because while the workers were locked out by Canada Post for about a month, I found another courier service within Canada that is half the price of Canada Post. So I've shipped things to Germany and to the US and so forth for half of what I used to charge. If you're interested in purchasing this fountain pen, send me an email at inkquiringminds@gmail.com with your name and your address, and I'll get you a quote for shipping. And I'll give you instructions on how to pay my PayPal. And at the beginning of this video, I showed you a number of Vacumatics that were waiting for restoration, but they might have to wait. Just in a couple of hours now, I'm going to go and retrieve 2 third-generation Parker Vacumatics, one in emerald pearl and one in golden pearl. One of them has a pretty wonky nib, but I got them for a fairly good price here locally. It's just about 10 minutes away from my house. So we're going to be looking at doing a resurrection of one of those 2 pens anyway next week. So that's something to look forward to. Until then, I'm hoping you all had a very happy New Year's celebration and are back at the grindstone again. And that just leaves it for me to say thank you for watching. And that's all she wrote.